you very much. So the first deputation we have is from the Kilmarnock Residents Association. Tony Simons will be speaking on behalf of them, and that's regarding item 7, the pre-notification engagement for plan changes 13, 14 and 15. Welcome, Tony Simons. Welcome, Tony.
Yeah, thank you.
You'll have 10 minutes, and that also includes any time for any questions and answers as well.
Okay, thank you. You can hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. Just wonder, can you see that slide on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Look, thank you for allowing me a short time to address you this morning on the proposed planning changes that you are considering to accommodate housing intensification. I just want to talk briefly about the importance of conservation in the city, and just give you a bit of an outline of what our position is regarding these proposed changes. We are the Riccarton Bush Kilmarnock Residents Association, which represents a residential area under some pressure. It's the area, as you probably are aware, north of Riccarton Road, bordered by Riccarton Road to the south, and Mona Vale, the railway line, to the east, then running up north to Matai Street West, that vicinity, and then across to Riccarton House and Bush. So it's roughly a rectangular area, which is of some significance to Christchurch. The heritage and character features that we are particularly proud of in and around our area include Mona Vale, the Britain Stables, the War Memorial at Jane Dean's Close and Boys High, or there are actually 2 war memorials, one at each of those places, the original Christchurch Boys High buildings, the original Riccarton Estate farm buildings, the Kahu Road Bridge, and an extensive stock of character pre-World War housing which still exists in the area, plus hundreds of trees we consider that are worth preserving and saving. There is the iconic Avon River running across our northern boundary. And of course, Riccarton House and Bush, which is all that's left of Putaringamotu, which is the original native bush area that used to cover the entire Canterbury Plains. We think there is an unacceptably short time frame for community consultation on these changes. However, we do accept this is because the government has imposed some timetables on you, and there's probably not a lot you can do about it. But it's the same undignified haste that accompanied the introduction of the housing intensification legislation in the first place. It's somewhat disconcerting. There's no way this is enough time for the people of Christchurch to digest what all this means and respond, I suggest. We're looking here at an avalanche of reports and recommendations. They take up 11 pages of your agenda today, plus there are no fewer than 43 separate reports, maps, illustrations attached as appendices. I struggled with this, and I'm sure the average person in Christchurch, the average community group in Christchurch will struggle with this as well. So given this complexity, we're really looking to you, our elected councillors, to make some courageous decisions and do the right thing by this city. We don't really see enough in these reports that takes account of the need to protect our area of Riccarton from development, from the developers and what they're doing. We are strongly against intensive 3-story apartment developments being allowed as of right. We know what they will lead to. They will lead to even taller developments in the future. I read yesterday that more than $2 billion worth of new housing was approved to be built across the greater Christchurch area last year, and 2/3 of that is apartments or townhouses. That is unprecedented. We say housing is being provided already, and now is the time for some perspective. The Riccarton Bush Kilmarnock Residents Association was formed many years ago to preserve our residential area from commercial development Somewhat ironic, we now find ourselves opposing residential development because this new law effectively abdicates responsibility for town planning to developers. In 2015, our association successfully argued before the Christchurch Replacement District Plan hearing panel for the retention of residential suburban density in our area. That panel was chaired by the Honourable Sir John Hanson, who supported us. It decided the area should not be intensified, and despite what council staff might tell you, that decision was not made because of wastewater constraints. In his decision, Sir John stated, "We agree with the Crown's position that a lack of wastewater infrastructure capacity is not a valid basis for scaling back on intensification in this area. However, on balance, we consider we should not make a direction for more medium density." In other words, his decision was nothing to do with a lack of infrastructure. Instead, he said it was based on the need for proper design outcomes, especially given the established amenity values in the area and the impact that medium density would have on those values. We spoke, you may remember, last August to this committee before the select committee hearings on the intensification legislation. Can I say we were thankful that the council subsequently put in a strong submission to that select committee. However, and we do read in today's agenda that council staff have employed a high threshold for including areas or features as residential heritage areas. What struck me about this was the number of areas they have assessed and subsequently discounted illustrates that very high threshold, and we're dismayed by this. In 2010, before the earthquakes, you had a list of 89 possible character or heritage areas, and in just 7 of those have been taken forward into today's agenda. And while 4 may have been added since, that's still just 11 for the entire city. In other words, just 7% of the original 2010 list of possible character or heritage areas have made it through. And that long list was drawn up before the earthquakes. The earthquakes then left Christchurch almost bereft of heritage. We, of all cities in New Zealand, should have a low threshold, not a high threshold, when it comes to conserving, preserving, and protecting our history and environment. And not just individual buildings or features, but also character neighbourhoods and trees. I'm a bit hot on trees. Developers say they will replace the trees that they chop down with new ones. That's not any kind of compensation. The real challenge is not planting them, it's keeping them alive and healthy. And when it comes to that, the developers are nowhere to be seen. So, just in conclusion, we're appealing to this council to set a lower threshold for character and heritage and be environmentally courageous when determining what should be qualifying matters. Take decisions boldly with our environmental future in mind. Can I say I believe Christchurch can continue to be a garden city, or it might even become a national park city, but that won't happen if we just sit back and watch. Thank you again for the opportunity to talk to you this morning. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tony, for your deputation. And as you rightly said, this has obviously been directed on us from central government, and there is a certain time frame that we have to notify these plan changes. But this step is not the notification of the plan changes. The additional step that we put in, we don't actually technically have to do it. I think it's a really important step, and that is the pre-engagement, pre-notification engagement, so we can actually go out and actually get as much information from the community as possible to hopefully help shape it more. So there's obviously going to be more time that we can have there with you discussing that, and then obviously that will feed into the final district plan changes that we will notify, I believe, in July. Is there any questions, Pauline?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Tony. That was an excellent, really strong, clear submission. I congratulate you on presenting it so well. I've just got a really quick question. And you mentioned Sir John Hanson, and when you made a submission to that panel way back then.
2015, yeah.
Yeah, was that about the same area that you outlined to us, or was it Riccarton generally? It's that
No,
area.
well, look, to be honest, we're approaching this from a somewhat selfish viewpoint. We're talking about the Riccarton Bush Kilmarnock Residents Association area, but look, the same arguments apply across the entire city. But in terms of what Sir John Hanson was talking about, it's exactly the same area that we're talking about today.
Great, thank you very much.
Jim, if it's a quick question, you can ask it. There's about 30 seconds left.
Thank you, Tony. Particularly concern Riccarton area, strong against the build up a 3-story in the Riccarton area. You mentioned particular in the northern part of the Riccarton Road, or is cover even southern part of Riccarton Road.
Sorry, could you just repeat the last part, Jim?
I repeat is because you concern Riccarton, we are reluctant to build up based on the NPSUD build up the 3 stories. You only concern in your area also cover the southern part area.
Yeah, look, the area is if I'm hearing you correctly, the area we're talking about is residential north of Riccarton Road, right? And it runs up about 2 blocks north of Riccarton Road. So I suppose at the northern side, it's Christchurch Boys High School, across to Matai Street West, the Britain Stables, and then through to the edge of the western side of Mona Vale. That's our area of concern. But look, frankly, the entire area from the route that the Avon River follows from Riccarton House right through to Deans Avenue and into the city is an area that's worth preserving. It's historic. It's the founding borough of Riccarton was the founding borough of Christchurch. There's a lot of significance in that area that we should be thinking about.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tony, for your deputation. The next deputation is from Tony Dale. Welcome, Tony.
Hello there.
Thank you. You also have 10 minutes. That includes any time for questions and answers too, and you can start whenever you're ready. Thanks.
Okay, I'll start now. So thank you all for the opportunity to speak to you today. I want to address the meeting about the district plan changes PC13 and PC14 that will be discussed today. So first of all, I'll start with PC14, the intensification changes. So we see that the National Policy Statement on Urban Design has been formulated to increase the housing supply and thereby alleviate the housing crisis that's currently on in New Zealand. But it's been heavily criticised for its one-size-fits-all approach, designed in Wellington for Auckland and Wellington. So the National Policy Statement attempts to solve a problem that simply doesn't exist here. And of course, you'll be well aware, last year was record-setting for the number of building consents issued in Christchurch to the value of some $2 billion. And a substantial proportion of those consents were for apartments and terraced housing, the very kind of high-intensity housing that the government wants. So obviously the council is doing something right. Well done. There's no guarantee, in fact, that the changes introduced by PC14 because of the NPS won't break a system that's already working well, delays notwithstanding. And we've been here before, of course, when you think about how the government eagerly jumped in after the earthquakes to introduce the very same kind of densification that we're now grappling with. The councillors and staff who have been designing the PC14 plan changes must be uncomfortably aware of how perverse the National Policy Statement on Urban Development is for Christchurch. The introduction of densification around centres such as Riccarton and Papanui, amongst others, will act as a funnel to shift development away from the city centre. And the council's own modelling shows this when you look at some of the reports attached to the agenda. There is a little map of intensification potential of various suburbs around central Christchurch. And in fact, the city centre is on the cool side of the map. It's a temperature map, so the cooler temperatures in the city centre, hotter temperatures in areas like Riccarton, Tapanui and so on. And we don't want this. We want development, high intensity development in the city centre. We wanted it for years. The centre of Christchurch has been stagnating for years, long before the earthquakes. And it seems like there's very little in the national policy statement to fix these kinds of problems. And not surprisingly, perhaps, these are very wicked problems, urban stagnation, population growth in the wrong places and so on. So the one-size-fits-all policies in the national policy statement simply won't fix things. So the council recognises that Riccarton and other city centres like us are not big enough for independent metropolitan areas because they don't provide, and I quote here, the broad range of commercial, community, recreational and residential activities that would be expected. So the changes mandated by the national policy statement may indeed impact on these areas which seem like larger suburban centres but are not. And there may well be problems caused by a concrete jungle growing up in Riccarton or Tapanui that is simply lacks the facilities that you might expect for a larger urban centre. So no one wants to live in a concrete jungle. There may well be social problems, and there are already plenty of examples of poor quality, high density housing in Riccarton. Once again, what is there in the national policy statement to fix these kinds of things? In fact, the PC14 changes will increase of allowable site density, building coverage in a section, building height and height to boundary, and it will decrease the minimum setback, site area and outdoor living space. And all of those changes will impact existing residents as well as new builds. So instead of trying to provide better amenities for the population, these changes will make things worse if they're not well controlled. And what is there in the planning changes to control development, to provide amenity values? Will there even be any consideration of them? The Resource Management Act, with its definition of amenity values, is going to be repealed. There's very little mention in the newer legislation of such things. Finally, the lack of consultation is a real risk for PC14, as Tony Simon has already pointed out, because the implementation deadline is very close. And while the council is trying to mitigate against these things and include as much consultation as possible with the pre-notification consultation and so on, these changes are drastic. I mean, they're the very changes that we feared back in the days of the earthquake planning changes. Now it's coming to pass, and with an even tighter deadline of only months. These changes are drastic. And what is there to protect our amenity values? So next, I'd like to talk about PC13, the heritage plan change.
Tony, just to let you know, you've got about 2.5 minutes left.
Right. I'll motor through it then. So Riccarton is the founding borough of Christchurch, and yet almost none of Riccarton has been classified as a residential heritage area. There's only the small area around the Pico and Shan Crescents. There is a case to classify the entire area bounded by Riccarton Road, Pereri Street, Pendleton Road and Deans Avenue when you consider the historic buildings that that area contains, such as Mona Vale and the Britain Stables. What is there to prevent Riccarton Bush being surrounded by 6-storey apartment blocks? Generally, why aren't there many more residential heritage areas than the 11 that are identified in the council reports? After the earthquakes, Christchurch lost many more heritage buildings than other New Zealand cities have, and especially worrying is the high rise and dense housing mandated by the NPS that will dramatically change the character of Riccarton if development is left to run rampant. And yet, there have already been decisions in the past saying that we should not intensify areas such as Riccarton. That is because of amenity and character, important values that we need to preserve. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Tony. There's a minute left. Does anyone have a question? No. Excellent. Thank you for your deputation.
Thank you.
The last deputation is from Helen Broughton. Welcome, Helen. You also have 10 minutes, which includes time for any questions and answers. Start when you're ready. Thanks. Sorry, Helen, we can't hear you. So you're still not coming through, Helen?
She just needs to unmute.
You need to unmute.
Unmute.
Good. Thank you. Hi, Jake. Hi, Jake. Thank you for the opportunity to present. I spent 3 hours on Saturday going through chapter 14, which is the residential chapter. I'm going to say this is a very sad day for Christchurch. It's the day that council will need to place or start to place into its district plan high-rise development across all of Christchurch. Particularly sad that the council is not doing it through its own will, but this change has been driven by central government. The changes, as you know, are required by the National Policy Statement 2021, and both regional councils and our council have no option but to implement. So what is proposed today, or what is going forward today, will change the city forever. I'm aware that some of you are not comfortable with this, and can I ask you to record the fact through a resolution to state that the City Council is reluctantly putting this forward, but has been required to do so by central government. I really believe that we need to make it very clear for the future and people looking back what has caused this district plan change, because it's not going to be acceptable to Christchurch people. Just a minute. I want to speak and positively about the effort that council made in late 2019 with a 30-page submission to government requesting that Christchurch not be a Tier 1 city. Council's submission was ignored. We became a Tier 1 city, and that is why today you have to push through these planning requirements. Council staff must have been under a huge pressure to produce this document, and I'd like to make two, what I think are positive comments. The 5 large centres are not defined as metropolitan centres, and I think that's positive because a lot of issues would have flown from that. And the 2020 version of 6 stories around commercial centres seemed to me, by reading Plan Chapter 14, to not being adapted at this stage. Now, I've had a late evening conversation with Tony Stevenson, who advised me that some centres are captured in commercial centres. So the centre closest to me is Riccarton, and it may be not staying at 3 stories, it may be going to 6 stories, but it's covered in the commercial centre chapter. So I will try and get more information on that, because last night I thought that, having read Chapter 14, I thought there was no sense of 6 rise at this point. It had been deferred. So I'll clarify that. 2 technical points. I think I've been over this before. 3-storey buildings won't stay at 3 stories. Resource consents can be applied for. I believe you'll get 4 or 5-storey buildings. We've had an example already in Christchurch, opposite the girls' high school, where 3-storey townhouses were allowed under residential medium density, an application in for 5-storey apartments, very small apartments. That got approved in a resource consent which was non-notified. So just be aware, 3 stories won't stay at that. Currently, we have over-intensification. The residential medium density zone was meant to cater for 30 households per hectare. It's currently operating at 75 households per hectare. So we've gone far beyond what we perceived in the district plan. I don't know how you rein that back, but just be aware you're getting very dense housing, very few trees, a lot of concrete, and I don't think it's what we want in Christchurch. Now, I'd just like to touch on the area that both Tonys have touched on, and this is the area where I live. It's Rada Street, round by Riccarton House and Bush. I think there's 2 issues here. Should this be a heritage area? And the other 2 have outlined the heritage buildings in this area, and I think a case can be made. So I'm not quite sure what the 4 cases were who weren't heritage, who became heritage, but I'll have to have a close look at that. But I guess that's an argument that I and other people in the association can submit. And I want to talk about the hearings panel in 2015-16. A huge amount of effort was put in to persuade the panel that we should remain suburban density. We actually won that case, but it was a huge effort and stress for the community. And I do wonder if that should be seen as a qualifying matter. Now, we'll have to advance that argument, but I want to make it very clear that this area was judged by John Hanson to stay suburban density. It wasn't because of wastewater constraints. Some of the information from staff comes back as wastewater constraints. It wasn't. It was about the amenity values. So the last plea I would have is that I have not been able to talk to planning staff for about 2 months. What I would like going forward for the public is that somehow the staff are available to discuss these issues with all the public across Christchurch, or the ones who want to speak about it. It's hard enough for me to handle this without just being a lay person who's concerned. So a plea, please, if we, the public, can get access to planners or people who know something about these issues reasonably promptly. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Obviously, the decision we're making today is actually to do pre-notification engagement with the community.
Yes.
And I assume that you would support that aspect of what we're deciding today.
Sorry?
You support
Was that
us
a
doing.
question?
You support us doing pre-notification engagement?
Well, you have two options, I think, or you have three. One is you say we don't like this at all. We aren't passing this, and therefore we're standing up to central government. That's one option. Two, and this is the option I think is more reasonable, that you say we're passing this reluctantly. We have no option because of the central government requirements to pass these district plan changes for consultation.
Thanks, Helen.
And the third option is that you don't put that clause in and just pass it as is.
Thank you. Sam?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Helen. I just wondered your comment at the very beginning about the resolution that you suggested. Would you be able to circulate that perhaps?
You have it about are you?
Your concerns around it. If you could just circulate it, then we can have a discussion later on as to whether it's appropriate or not.
To the councillors.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the mayor. Yeah.
And the mayor. Oh yes, absolutely. Yes.
Perfect. Thanks.
I don't see any other questions. Thank you, Helen, for your time.
Thank you.
There's no presentation of petitions, so we'll move to item 7, which is the MPS